had some issues this morning. So hopefully those issues have been resolved. I wanted to start this live stream series, and it's all going to be about me answering viewer questions. So I received a great letter from Jennifer, who was basically, it's a long letter, but basically what she's asking me is, how does a child develop a sense of self if their parents aren't aware? So she writes, since the majority of the population in America falls on the spectrum of narcissism or codependency, how does a child develop a sense of self, even with the most devoted parents, if the parents aren't enlightened? Great question. Is enlightenment necessary? And how does a child develop a sense of being enough? How do they survive adolescence? I ask this because now that I have this new knowledge, I see it everywhere. I feel narcissism and codependency are the majority vibrations here in the West. Is that by design? On a positive note, she says, I have lots of contrast to analyze, and it's helping me catch stuff so I don't get too disconnected when faced with a potential trigger. I'm also finding it easier and easier to hold on to myself. I think it's a really great question, and I think you're right, Jennifer. I think that a lot of us here, and a lot of us here are in the West are experiencing what's happening, and in this case, I'm just trying to go back to my dashboard here. So I just want to make sure that this is going okay. So, and in this case, what we have to figure out when we're dealing with children is, yes, it is possible. It absolutely is possible to develop a sense of self. But the issue that we have to concern ourselves with is, will these children be self-aware? Because it's important to understand that having a sense of self is not the same as being aware of the self. So there are two different issues. So I can know that I have a self. As a child, I could go through a difficult upbringing, let's say, and I could find it difficult to have a self. And then as I age, as I mature as a child, I can develop a sense of self in spite of my upbringing. And I can decide who I am and what I feel and what I like to do. If I want to dance, I dance. If I want to become a construction worker, I can become a construction worker. You can really develop a sense of self. But that doesn't mean that you will be aware of the self. So it's really, really important that we make that distinction, that a child can have a sense of self, but they won't be aware of the self. So I totally get it. It's very difficult. One of the things that Jennifer asks is it necessary for a parent to have to be enlightened in order for a child to develop a sense of self? Again, when I think of enlightenment, I'm thinking about people who are aware of the self, right? So it's a fine line, because a person who's enlightened, in my opinion, is someone who's very, very super aware, and they're aware of the self, and they understand the observer within, and they can look down at their programs, and they can look down at the way they behave, and they can objectify their feelings and objectify their thought patterns. That's what I consider someone who's is enlightened. But I don't think you have to be an enlightened parent to have a child who's able to develop a sense of self. You can have self-esteem for the self, but that doesn't mean you're aware of the self, in my opinion. So I think it's a really, really great question. One of the things that we need to do is, as we journey forward, is we need to learn how to be non-reactive, right? So we have to learn how not to react to the programs, because anytime we get caught up in emotionality, we are then reacting. It's all going to go back to what's been downloaded before, and what's in our brain in terms of what we're used to doing when someone, let's say, pisses us off. Whatever we've done in the past has been downloaded, so that's part of our data, and that's going to show up in the moment. So it's really, really important that on our journey we learn how to be less reactive. That doesn't mean that we feel less. That just means we learn to objectify our emotions, and we learn how to sort of like be able to observe them and not react to them. One of the things that I like to teach is I like to teach people how to become the observer of their emotions. When you're codependent and you've come from a dysfunctional home, then you're codependent on other people. You're codependent on what other people think of you because you haven't received that sense of validation and that sense of feeling seen by the people outside of you, right? So until you experience that, you're going to keep looking for this sense of validation outside of the self, hence codependency. Now, children who grow up in homes where mommy and daddy see them and validate them, those children are mirrored back a sense of self, because when I can see you, if you're my child and I can see you, and every time you wake up or you walk into a room, I go, oh, there she is, or there he is, I make a big deal out of you, or you're sick and I acknowledge it, or I can tell you need something and I acknowledge it, then that's me allowing you to feel seen. It's almost like a mirror. Like, wow, mommy sees me. And then what happens in your own brain is like you're able to see yourself. But when you come from a dysfunctional home, and children come from dysfunctional homes, generally speaking, what ends up happening is there is no mirror being reflected back to them that is positive. There is no sense of self or identity being reflected back to them. So the child never has that mirror to confront internally. And our perception has to be mirrored back to us. So how our mother sees us or how our father sees us is how we eventually see the self. So if mommy is distracted and daddy is distracted and I don't matter, then my experience of not feeling mattered is going to be ultimately my experience of self. Now, something internal happens within me, and I don't know how to tap into it because no one else ever validated it from outside of myself. Hence codependency, hence attachment trauma, hence seeking validation outside of myself. It's so important that children absolutely feel seen. Before the age 3, 4, or 5, they have to feel like, me, I matter. Whoever I am, I'm real. I matter. I get a boo-boo, that matters. I get a bellyache, that matters. I look sad, that matters. That's how we teach children that they matter. Very, very important. So when Jennifer's question is awesome, and for those of you who just joined the line, basically what she's asking, how does a child develop a sense of self even when the most devoted parents, if the parents aren't enlightened? And again, she asks, is enlightenment necessary? And how does a child develop the sense of being enough? How do they survive adolescence? So we can survive adolescence, but we're probably going to be stuck in survival mode, okay? And I think a lot of adolescents today are in survival mode because our society, in my opinion, it's epidemic in terms of codependency. Our society is infused with the idea that you're not good enough. And, if you don't look like this person, you're not beautiful. And if you don't use that beauty product, you're not beautiful. And if you're not that weight, you're not beautiful. Or if you're that guy, you're nothing if you don't have that degree. Or if you're a guy, you don't drive that car, you're nothing. Or if you're a guy and your girl doesn't look like that, you're nothing, So I think that we really need to confront the idea that codependency is sort of like a societal issue. We're being bred to believe that we're not good enough and that our happiness and our sense of self is going to be found outside somewhere. So we need to confront that. And we really do need to appreciate what young people are going through today, as well as what we went through. If we didn't have the most enlightened parents, then we're going to have to struggle for that sense of self. Now, in terms of how does a child survive, we want to teach children how not just to survive, but to thrive. And so it is possible for, parents who are not enlightened, spiritually enlightened, to have children who do have a sense of self. It's very, very possible. But having a sense of self is not the same thing as being enlightened and aware of the self. So I can understand that I love to dance, or I love computers, or I love sales, or I love to paint, or I love to sing, or I love people. I can identify with these nuances within me that make me feel like that's who I am. And I can even pay attention to that and follow that. But that doesn't mean that I will be aware of the backstory. That doesn't mean that I'll be aware of the self. That doesn't mean that I can be the observer of the self. That doesn't mean that I can be the observer of the experience of wanting to do X, Y, and Z. So that is going to conclude my very quick live stream. Look forward to more. I will be, again, this is my first attempt at a live stream today. I had some issues this morning, but we're working them out. And keep your questions coming, because my live stream events are going to be all geared towards answering your viewer questions and comments. So thanks for watching, and I will announce the next live stream on my channel. Namaste, everybody. Bye.